Every card game got its own poster boy, or should I say poster dragon, to sell their products. Magic got Nicobolus, Pokemon has Charizard, and of course Yu-Gi-Oh! Has Blue Eyes White Dragon. But we, Cardfight Vanguard players, have Dragonic Overlord. And today, we're going to take a look and see which versions of Dragonic Overlords reigns supreme. Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another off-topic Vanguard discussion video. And as you might have noticed, the last couple of days we're doing deck spotlights for VBTL 8, and yesterday we did the one for Dragonic Blade Master, and the one coming up next is of course Dragonic Overlord the Cross. And with that I thought maybe do something interesting or a fun little intermission video where we're gonna take a look at all the different forms of Overlord himself, and we've done this before with Asha and Chronojet, and Overlord is one of those cards that got a lot of different prints, but also a lot of different versions. So not only different retrains, but just very uniquely designed cards, like we have Overlord, Overlord the Cross, Overlord the End, Overlord the Ace, Overlord the Great, Overlord the Legend, Overlord whatever, Overlord the Victory, you can name it. So in today's video, we're gonna rank all these different Overlords not only by art, but also by their availability and skill potential. So of course we're back at Tier Maker, and as you can see on the bottom we have got all the versions of Dragonic Overlord, and we're gonna do it in chronological order. So the first Overlord and then all the way up to the latest Overlord, that is of course Overlord the Cross in the V series, and we've got a special one with Overlord the Victory, which is a very unique card. Now, of course, we're going to start off with the original Overlord from the trial deck, and this is probably one of those baseline Overlords where everything's going to be compared to, but in comparison to all the other Overlords, I think this is relatively a weak Overlord, as its skill was an on-hit skill that could either work on rearguard as Vanguard's or Vanguard unit, but the problem is if you just guard it, and you can guard it, then the Overlord player just wasted a lot of resources and actually didn't gain anything from it. So it's not really looking all that good for him. So I'm gonna put it in the C category. Yes, I'm not really a fan of this card. The artwork is also not that great. It's very bland. And with that, there's also other versions of this card. And one of those is the version, the Triple R version or the SP version that was in the first set. I'm gonna put this one at the C rank as well. I think the artwork is better because it has more of an action pose. But the problem is the Triple R foiling of this set is horrendous, as everything in the background, those color lines, those are foiled, but it makes the artwork look very messy in the foiling pattern themselves, and it makes the artwork not really pop out as you wanted to have that effect with Triple R. So that is probably where I'm gonna downgrade the value, so that's why it's sticking in the C category. Now the final one is again a reprint or a different printing of the original Overlord, and this was the promo version, but I'm not a fan of this card. This looks more like a still image from the anime. The quality is a lot less than all the other cards that we've seen with Vanguard, and especially in comparison to the other Overlords, so it's gonna be in D category, no questions asked. With the original Overlords out of the way, we're gonna take a look at the first evolution of Overlord, and for some reason they immediately made it called The End, and this is funny enough because it's the start of an entire series, as we can see all the other forms of Overlords coming afterwards. But The End is an easy S tier. Not only is the artwork amazing, there are some interesting SPs with some extra additions to it, so there's a lot of availability to it, but the skill itself is also really powerful. It's a very meta-defining card at the time when this card came out. It's one of those best decks together with MLB, and we even seen this in Vanguard 0. Like, this was one of the best decks that came out of set 4, and it's still very good even a couple of stats afterwards. And interesting enough, Overlord The End even becomes better like years in the future, as once we take a look at some other cards, as it has a Legion form that works with this card. So The End is something that just doesn't end, as it keeps reoccurring in the series. So S tier, no question asked. Then the next Overlord that we're gonna see is yet again Dragonic Overlord, only this time it's an absolute retrain. And this is unique in the fact that Vanguard doesn't really do these types of retrains as often. Usually when they retrain a card to a newer version, they give the same name, but with a different asterisk to it. So it has a title or just a different version than this. But in this case, Dragonic Overlord is just the same name, but it has a different skill. In this case, it has the Break Right skill. And this honestly is for me a B tier. It's a really solid skill. It allows you to give a restand effect to any other grade 3 boss unit that you might play. It has a lot of interesting interactions, but the problem is its hard once per turn restriction is quite annoying, as this had the old once per turn clause without the marker, meaning with the new ruling change where once per turn rulings are a bit more flexible and you could use it in more different scenarios, this was not one of those cards that could benefit from that re-ruling, as this was using the old ruling by just hard writing it down on the card itself. And only getting the restand into a rearguard might not be as beneficial as, let's say per se, that you could restand by hitting the Vanguard twice. That's way more value than just ramming into a rearguard. Now the next version of Overlord is in evolution of this particular break right version of Dragonic Overlord, as we have Dragonic Overlord the Rebirth, or Reverse, depending on how you want to pronounce the name or which direction you want to go with that translation. And this unit has the ability to restand while attacked into the Vanguard. And this immediately showcases the interaction with the break right Overlord, as you could attack into a rearguard, then restand, then attack into a Vanguard, and then use Rebirth's ability to then restand once again. So you could potentially attack 3 times and have a lot of drive checks and potentially overwhelm your opponent with some multi-crit attacks. And seeing as this Dragonic Overlord gets multiple iteration of 10k power, means those attacks are quite heavy. And attacking with a 31k Vanguard, or potentially 33, as it has the cross-right skill, means a lot more than nowadays, as back in the day when this card came out, shields were a lot lower. Your highest shield value was 10k, and that was on a critical trigger or a stand trigger. And your grade 1s and grade 2s were just 5k shield, and your draw triggers are 5k shield. So you either need a couple of heals and crits to survive, or your stand triggers, but otherwise, you probably will not survive the multiple attacks this card could dish out in combination with Dragonic Overlord, the Break Right retrain. And it needing to lock its own field was actually pretty decent at the time, as it was released at a time where Link Joker was pretty good. So this was also really good against the Link Joker matchup, which was one of the toughest matchups at the time for Vanguard. So that's actually a pretty good skill for it at that moment. And its artwork is also pretty phenomenal, so for that I'm gonna give it an A-star rating. It's probably not as viable as nowadays, as something like The End is playable, but it was a card that was pretty good. Now we're going to get to the final Overlord version of the original series, and this is going to be the Legion Overlord, as we have Perdition Emperor Dragon, Dragonic Overlord the Great, or just short, Overlord the Great. Personally, I have no real feelings about this particular card. I think the artwork is fine, and the skill is something we've seen many times before. It's just a generic Vanguard restand skill, only in this case it's a very easy Vanguard restand skill to activate, as it's just use the ability and you can restand if you're in Legion, which is pretty easy to fulfill, a lot easier to do than the Rebirth, as that card needed to have a full field locked, so you need more cards to be able to fulfill those conditions. So this is a much more consistent card, but being behind the Legion means it's also a bit slower, so for me it's gonna be a generic B tier. Like, the artwork, it's not that amazing in my honest opinion. Like, there's a Legion rare version, but I have no real I have no attachment to this version of Overlord the Great, so for that I'm just gonna put it in B tier, as the skill is, it's good, but it's super generic, and the artwork is not mind-blowing, so for that I'm gonna put it in B tier. Now, with that Overlord out of the way, let's jump straight into the G era, and the first Overlord that we see is Overlord the Cross. And this is a very interesting Overlord, as it is another Legion card, just like Overlord the Great, but this card is legioning with Overlord the End. And this brings back the End into the G era, and it's a pretty strong Legion nonetheless, even at the time where strides were starting to evolve, as this was still at the beginning stages of the G era. But interesting enough, this card has a resurgence during the whole reboot, as it, together with force markers, makes this deck even more threatening, as you can write into the Overlord, the normal Overlord with the V-Series, get the force marker, and then go into this thing, a Legion with your The End. Then suddenly this becomes a lot more threatening. But that isn't where this card becomes that powerful in the V-Series, as this card becomes even more threatening with the V series the end, which we will go over later in this video. So for the power potential of this card during the time it came out, and then still being relevant during the V series in the premium landscape, and its artwork being quite phenomenal, this is for me an easy S tier. The Cross is an insanely powerful card that came out, and it's still pretty good in premium and will probably see a lot of play even for the coming foreseeable future. Now the next card is the very first Stride Fusion form of Dragonic Overlord, and that is Dragonic Overlord the Ace. And the Ace is a quite generic restander or a stride card that just attacks the Vanguard and can potentially restand if you use its ability. It's quite overcosted for what it does, but interesting enough, with the new once per turn ruling, you could potentially stack this skill multiple times if you could pay the cost multiple times ahead of time, and then potentially have a triple restanding Vanguard or a quadruple restanding Vanguard. Is it good? Not really. Is it an interesting stride? Does it help the Overlord engine? Yes, to some extent. You can see it run in some G-zones, but it's not the greatest of stride. And I think it's in the same ballpark as the Legion, the Great, that it's an okay stride. It has some neat interactions, but it's not that amazing. And I'm also not really that fan of the artwork itself. Now, the Overlord that comes afterward is the Overlord of the Legend deck of Kaitushki. And that is, of course, Dragonic Overlord, the Legend. And the Legend is a very interesting Overlord card because it has a skill that we've never seen before and also is never done afterwards, because we have a Great Free that can turn itself into a stride. It has the ability to become basically the Ace, as it can reset itself once it attacks into rear guard and then can reset an attack into the Vanguard. The problem is here, however, is that to be able to do this, you still need to pay the cost for striding, so you don't really get any actual value of this ability, and its restand is into a rearguard and then into the Vanguard, so you're not getting more pressure onto your opponent because you're just slamming your powerful triple drive unit into a rearguard, so they can easily just take no guard and they only lose one card. Now, the artwork is pretty good, but it gets minus point for its SP version because the SP is so bad. It's just block letters, very thick block letters printed, slammed onto the cards, you could say, and that's about it. Nothing really fancy of the SP version, so that also gets minus point for what the card has to offer. I think the Legend, it was a nice thing to try, but I think they missed the ball here quite significantly, so I think it's gonna be in C tier. The art is pretty good, but the skill, it's not that great, because this card was, if it was even played at all at the time, was immediately shifted out of the Overlord decks the moment that Dragonic Overlord got the latest version in the Jira, which is the next card that we're gonna take a look at, which is Dragonic Overlord, the Destiny. Destiny is an amazing Great Free. This card is definitely an S tier for me, because the artwork, for one, is amazing. The SP is really beautiful. It was also very expensive at the time of the release that card came out. But its skills were also really, really powerful. It had a way to deal with Link Joker in the fact that you could burn your own locked cards, or you just get some retire on demand. It was one of those cards that has a skill that you will get value for every single turn, as its skill will activate every single turn that you get your turn, as it has a beginning of main phase ability. But on top of that, it also has a really good stride skill effect, as it could retire more cards, and it could fetch you a Overlord in your top 7 cards. That not only could secure you your rights for next turn if you want to write another copy to gain soul, but it also allows you to get discard fodder for your strong Overlord strides, like the Ace that needed a Overlord to discard for its restand ability, but also for the new stride that came out in the same set as the Destiny, that is of course Dragonic Overlord, the Purge. So Destiny is definitely an S tier for me. The skill is really strong and the artwork is also really amazing. Now with that, we're going to take a look at the Stride Fusion form of the Destiny, that is of course the Purge. And Dragonic Overlord the Purge was one of those strides that just did something. It was a multi-drive check unit that could potentially shoot your opponent to damage. It's none of those very original type of units, but it did the job. It gets the job done. But overall, I think it's an A tier. Like, the stride itself The problem with this strat is that it's just a singular attack with multiple drives that's depending on your opponent's damage. While yes, you can shoot your opponent a damage, but in certain scenarios, shooting your opponent a damage doesn't really do anything. And besides just giving your opponent the resources if they need those for particular situations. And coming in with multiple drive checks is fine and all, but just one perfect guard stops the attack, while other overlords has the recent capability, so the opponent needs multiple perfect guards or different kinds of shield capabilities to stop your attacks or your pressure plays. So the Purge, it's a strong card, but it's not higher than an A tier. It's definitely not in the same ballparks as the S tier overlords that are way more versatile in their playability and also are more impactful to their meta capabilities. Now that concludes all the OG and G-Era cards, so we dive straight into the V-Series retrains, and with that we're gonna take a look at yet again Dragonic Overlord, and this is gonna be the V-Series Dragonic Overlord, and we have once again 3 different versions of it, as we have the original trial deck version that has the special artwork with the potential signature, and the artwork is pretty good, but I'm not really a fan of those pose artworks. I want to see more action in my cards if it's something like a big dragon or a beast of a card. And its skill is kind of whatever. I think it's a C tier for it, because the problem with this Overlord is that it's a recent ability that's behind an on-hit. And the problem is, at the time this card came out, is that Protect was one of the strongest markers or the strongest archetypes within the game. And just having a perfect guard on demand means that this card didn't really do anything, because if you went second and your opponent had a Protect marker, they just use the perfect guard, and your Dragonic Overlord just sits there. It's nice that it can gain an additional 10k power, but if the attack doesn't hit, it doesn't really do anything. Now, same with the alternate artwork. I like this artwork more, so I'm going to put it ahead of the original Overlord, but it doesn't fix the problems that the original Overlord of the V-Series has, because it still has the original problems of it needing to be able to hit to get its value. Now, the final version of the original Overlord that we would get in the V-Series is the special promotion from the collector set. And I'm going to be honest, this is for me a D tier. This is probably one of the most ugliest forms that we've seen. Like, it could be your kind of cup of tea, these type of artworks, but I don't think this fits in Vanguard at all. And it shouldn't really been made. I have the same opinion about the Blessed Dark and the Blessed Blade. I think they're one of the most ugliest cards we've seen. But if you like this artwork, hey, that's your personal opinion. Like, I have my opinion, you have your opinion. This is just how I'm gonna rate the card for what it is. So definitely straight to D tier. It will take a while before we're gonna see a new form of Overlord. And the first one that we're gonna see, interesting enough, is not the End, but the Great. And the Great is actually a pretty good card for Kagero in the V-Series, because this changes the power level of Kagero and immediately made it a very strong deck, and was also a very expensive card on release, and it was for obvious reasons. You have an on-demand restand that not only resends the Vanguard, but it also resends the rear guards, and it's not behind a on-hit effect anymore. So you could get 5 attacks in a Force Clan, which is a lot, but on top of that, it allows you to get the Neoflame from the drop zone every single time that you ride the Great. So you have some reoccursion onto the field from your drop zone, which is actually pretty good. So we've seen a lot of capabilities from the Great, and the Great is also a really good card. For me, straight A tier. It's definitely a game changer for Kagero. And if it was not for the cross being so good with the End, then probably the Great would have more playability, or we would have seen more plays of that particular card in Kagero decks. Now, with that said, right after the Great, we saw the End, the new retrain of the End, and it was a overhyped card because, of course, what the End did in the original series and the resurgence that we had once the cross came out in the G-Era at the beginning of the stage of that time period. So we thought the End is going to be a game changer once again. But yes, the artwork is pretty good, but I think the original artwork is better. The skill was lacking quite a lot. So for that, it's for me, the original The End goes to a B tier. Because yes, it could restand potentially 2 times. And all those attacks, so 3 attacks could hit your Vanguard. The problem is, it was a really slow card that needed a lot of setup, and it was a super vulnerable deck, as you also need to put your hand size to a very low capability. Yes, if you could activate the skill in the late game, you could potentially just win the game on the spot by just resolving the skill. But a lot of things needed to go right in order to achieve this skill. But because it has that blowout ability, it's definitely better than the original counterparts of the Overlord that just could be stopped by a Perfect Guard, which isn't that ideal. That said, 1 year later, and about the time that I'm recording and filming this video, we would get Overlord the Cross. And the Cross changes everything, because it is basically Dragonic Overlord The End version 2, as it is an Overlord The End without any restrictions and some additions. So Overlord the Cross is an immediate S tier. This card is amazing. It's very powerful. It's really strong. It's one of those go first, win instantly decks if you manage to blow out your load right on the spot. It does have some problems with that. If you don't get the right cards, you don't really do anything. But interesting enough, the way how this card is designed, there is some future potential, as it can copy any Dragonic Overlord ability. So if we would get more Dragonic Overlords in the future, and those works with the continuous abilities of the Cross, then the Cross could actually be a lot better and become even stronger than it already is. So that's why it's, for me, definitely an S tier. The artwork is pretty good, and its skill is insane. Like, we immediately get a tier 1 deck out of this card together with The End, and it might potentially come back if we ever get something like a Dragonic Overlord Zaweldo or something. Now, with that said, we basically covered all the Dragonic Overlord cards that are officially out, but there's one more card that is printed, and that is Dragonic Overlord The Victory. A special promo that was given out to the winners to a special tournament, I believe, and its skill basically allows you to win the game if you could resolve the skill, but I cannot really judge the card on that skill because it's an illegal card that you cannot play. So the only thing that I can go to is with the artwork, and although the artwork is pretty dope, it doesn't really look like a Dragonic Overlord to me. If I see the artwork, I more think about the Steel Dragons, as this looks like a demonic dragon, while Dragonic Overlord is more of a dragon of the apocalypse than actually a demonic dragon. Yes, you can make the argument that it's one and the same, but when you look at the artworks of all the other Dragonic Overlords, they don't really look like Dragonic Overlord The Victory. So if I'm just going to judge in the artwork, I think it's going to be in an A tier. Like, the artwork is pretty dope, but its skill is really bad. You're not going to play it for the skill. Like, even if this card was legal, I don't think this card is even playable, because I don't even think the card has a force marker. No, it's just a Twin Drive 10k, so it even has lower value in defense capability. So yeah, it's just for the artwork for an A tier, but it's just for memes in this case. And there you have it. And that's basically the entire tier list for Dragonic Overlord, in my personal opinion. Keep in mind, I haven't personally played most of these decks where these cards were the main pivotal points of. I have played the G-Era Legend deck, so I've played with the Legend, the Ace. I've also piloted the Destiny with the Purge at the time, but most of the OG cards, like way back in the time, and the Legions and those kind of things, I have no actual experience with how strong those cards were, how they piloted, and I basically go from what I've heard from other people that played at the time, what they experienced, and of course the artwork when I look into them and how impactful they are right now in Premium. That's why you see that the End and the Cross are top dog, as they are insanely powerful in Premium, or at least the new DS with the old Cross is still better than the new Cross with the new DS in Standard. Like, that's pretty insane if you think about it, because Standard was like dominated by the Cross, but the new Cross didn't do anything in Premium because the old Cross was still better than the new Cross. So yeah, a lot is happening with Dragonic Overlord, and probably this is just the beginning of Dragonic Overlord's story, because even as we're going to go into the new era very soon with Overdress, and I bet you there's going to be at least a Dragonic Overlord The Overdress, or Dragonic Overlord The Dress, or something like that. You can bet money on that we're going to get a new era of Dragonic Overlord, and who knows, maybe even a new Blaster Blade, because Dragonic Overlord is our Charizard, and Blaster Blade is definitely our Pikachu. Yeah, get that image out of your mind. Well, with that said, let me know your tier list of your Dragonic Overlord, how you would rank them art-wise or skill-wise, or whatever way you want to rank them. I will leave a link to the tier list in the description down below, and share me your tier list on Twitter, on my personal Twitter at twitter.com/MrTimeleap, to see what you guys can come up with your favorite Dragonic Overlords. That said, I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters over patreon.com/Vanguard Insider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel and make everything happen on the channel, then you can simply go to patreon.com/Vanguard Insider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Timeleaf, and I see you guys in the next one.